Well, good morning. Happy Monday. This is Slav Polinski, Slav Polinski Homes. I hope you're doing well. I am so excited about our episode today. I have with us attorney Kevin Camden of Camden Law Offices. And the reason why I brought him on today is many of us realtors felt these multiple offer bidding wars would come to an end this year. However, they have continued. And, one realtor has one perspective. The one key thing about attorneys is they see all of the accepted contracts come their way. So I want to pick Kevin's brain on what he's seeing coming up over and over on these winning bids. And the other thing that I want to talk to him about is, along with all of these multiple offer situations, I have noticed an increase of cancellations over the last couple of years. So I want to talk to him about that. How can buyers and sellers protect themselves from cancellations coming up? Are there certain things that we should have in the contract maybe we're not putting in there? So let's get started. Hey, good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Doing very well, Slav. Good morning on Easter Monday.
I hope you had a great holiday.
We did. Weather was awesome, and it looks to continue this week. So let's enjoy it while we can.
Exactly. So, boy, I'm really excited talking to you today. Last year and a half with the low interest rates and shortage of inventory, we saw a lot of multiple offer situations, a lot of bidding wars, buyers really getting stressed out because whenever they put an offer in, they were probably one of 10 to 20 offers that came into the seller. And of course, when you're only picking one out of the 20, majority of them walk away feeling dejected and having to try again. This year, towards the end of last year, most of us realtors felt that inventory would increase. And with the interest rates also increasing, that we would probably not see these multiple offer situations anymore. However, they continue because the inventory level has dropped to such a point that buyer demand still outweighs the supply out there. I'm really curious to talk to you about, what are you seeing on contracts? Any creative things that buyers are putting into the contracts to have them, their offer win against all the competing offers? Any insights you could provide us on that?
Sure thing. What we're seeing now is, I'm in agreement with you. We anticipated that with raising rates and decline in housing stock that we would have seen a little bit of an end to this. And what we've seen in the office is actually the reverse. At the lower end, what I would refer to as more first-time home buyers, we're still seeing a lot of over-list offers. And the reason is they've been shut out of the market for a couple of years now, and they are coming in. We've had half a dozen clients or so in the last couple of months where they want to be in a particular location for any number of reasons: access to work, access to schooling in particular. So in the 150, 200,000 range, we're often seeing increase, bids over the list price because they're desperate to get those properties. Ironically, at the other end of the spectrum, we've also seen a few deals in what you might refer to as a luxury market area where we're still seeing over list offers, again, because the housing stock is so limited. And without getting into too much of a boring economic discussion, the people in the $1.5 million, $2.5 million homes, they've got the low rates. They're not going to sell a home at that price point to move into a $4 million home, for example, at a higher interest rate. So when they do come up on the market, there's intense bidding for it. A couple of things that we look for if you're going to see over list, and I'll just be real quick on this, then we'll talk about a couple of other things. I like to see proof of funds. And in fact, if we don't get that when we see an over list offer, we're going to ask for it. And you might refer to that as appraisal waiver. We kind of look at it as a bigger package. I want to make sure funds are liquid. We've had some seller clients that have gotten into these circumstances with waivers and above list price offers, and funds are tied up in trade accounts or in stocks. Those, despite what everybody sees on Hollywood, it doesn't liquidate instantly. There's typically a 3 to 5 day clearance window, and it takes a while to get those funds. Why is that important? Because if our sellers are competing between Slav and Kevin, and Slav comes in with a $5 million money market account, those funds are accessible immediately. If I come in with a couple $1 million stock account, you should raise questions because I have 3 kids that I'm trying to put through college. So the odds that that's happening are minimal. But putting that aside, you want access to the funds. We don't want to get into a circumstance 2 weeks before closing. Well, my broker said it's going to take a while. So we want to make sure funds are liquid. A couple of other things we want to look at. If you're truly in an overlist circumstance, you want to pick the offer that you're confident is going to close, because there have been some unscrupulous attorneys and realtors over the last few years that have come in over list. They've given, pre-approvals, and then all of a sudden we have issues where maybe they're not so approved. You want to look at things like, is there an appraisal waiver? And if so, do we have an addendum, or do we have some agreement that, fine, if the appraisal comes in at 1.5, even though you said you're going to pay 2 million, we don't care, right? We have to make sure that the funds are available. We also want to make sure that if you're looking at true as is, right? The seller's got a handful of offers. They're all over list. What's the least difficult for the seller to navigate? Well, of course, the least difficult would be no inspection, although very few clients do a no inspection, but certainly an inspection waiver or an as is, where you say, look, we understand the house may need work. We just want to have it inspected to make sure that the structure isn't crumbling, that the foundation isn't cracked to the point that it's a problem, and make sure both parties sign off on that. We often get people telling us on either side of the deal, oh, this is an as is sale. And of course, we'll go look at the paragraph on the multi-board, and both parties haven't signed it, or initialed it. And if both parties haven't initialed it, then we don't have an agreement on as is. Our experience is, if you don't have as is initialed by both parties before it gets to the attorneys, the odds that you're going to get attorney review to change it to as is are pretty minimal. So we certainly want something like that.
Yeah, that's so important. I've had realtors on the other end where we may have been missing a signature or initial, and they say, well, we'll just let the attorneys figure that out. It's like, no, let's take care of this right now, because bottom line is the attorney is going to be the one to make the decision on getting that initial. It's going to be that party, whether it's the buyer or the seller. So this
Correct.
has to be decided right now.
Exactly. And our job is to do what the clients want. There's a reason why that the sellers, for example, didn't, or the buyers didn't sign the as is. They weren't really committed to it. So you're not going to get it in attorney review, because that's just continuing negotiation, and nobody really wants to do that. Another area that I would recommend, particularly because folks seem to be jumping in the market in an opportunistic way, if you're going to do post-closing possession or do a rent back for a period of time, that's another circumstance that has to be agreed to before it gets to the attorneys. And in fact, if I'm advising a seller and they've got a couple offers they're looking in between, if one of the important things to them is they need to be able to stay in the property until they find something, and for the reasons that you just pointed out, it's becoming more and more difficult to find things, they may want a longer period of post-possession. That's got to be part of the offer, in my opinion, because if I just decided on a whim over the weekend, you know what, I saw this great video and Slav's got me convinced that I should list my house, and they contact you and they list it, and you're outstanding at what you do, so it's sold by next weekend. Where are we going to move? Well, we're going to need to stay in our house for a while. That needs to be part of the offer, in my opinion, because that's going to be a difference breaker for me. If we've got two offers that are similar and one of them has post-possession and the parties have agreed to it in writing, the appropriate language in the contract has been signed off on, that's going to sway me as the seller's attorney to say, fine, let's take that offer. And that's this happens 8 out of 10 times, unfortunately, and I know you're experienced with it. The realtors will tell the attorneys, oh yeah, everybody's agreed to post-possession. And I look at the contract and it's not signed. And of course, when I talk to the other attorney, she tells me, oh no, there's no agreement for post-possession. Well, now we've got an issue, because that was critical to why the contract was accepted. So I think those things are very important when we're getting into these over list. What's the most attractive? And honestly, we saw this years ago when the market was still white hot. How does a seller evaluate a financing versus a cash offer? Well, that's easy. You take the cash offer all the time if they're relatively close, or even if they're a few $1,000s difference. And you think, well, I don't want to leave money on the table. Yeah, but the difference is if you have a substantial cash offer or an all cash offer, now I don't have to worry about appraisals. I don't have to worry about other things in the lending process, particularly in a time. Now, fortunately, we're beyond it, but for a while during COVID, we saw a lot of people that were well qualified, started to go through financing, and then because COVID, lost a job, wound
Sure.
up with a reduction in salary, and now all of a sudden that loan deal is tenuous at best. So obviously, I would strongly encourage you to take the cash deal if you could, and it's not always the case, but those generally are the easiest. They tend to be smoother with respect to getting to closing and closing as well.
Yeah, I agree. So the one thing I have seen in the last couple years, I don't know if you've seen on your end, is an increase in cash offers. I'm not sure where some of these younger buyers are getting it, maybe borrowing it from their family, but we are seeing an increase. And what you mentioned before is so important, is to have that documentation, the proof of funds, of easily accessible funds. I had one realtor tell me when I asked for the proof of funds, "Oh, don't worry, my client's good for it." Like, well, I don't know. Maybe so,
Right.
but I don't know who your client is, and unless we have the proof of funds, this offer isn't going anywhere.
Right. And we've had some circumstances where younger people will come in, they'll make a cash offer, except their proof of funds is on mom and dad's account or on an aunt's and uncle's account. And
Hmm.
as we often talk about in the probate side of the practice, when you mix family and money, stuff happens. And
Sure.
while everybody may be getting along fantastically over last weekend, and sure, we'll give you the money for purposes of the purchase. 4 weeks from now, there may have been a falling out, and now all of a sudden, that proof of funds from mom and dad isn't going to help us for a purchase because they're not going to do it. So that's another thing when you're looking at proof of funds: whose name's on the account, and again, what type of account is it in? If it's in a 401k, be very, very careful. There's a lot of hurdles that you have to jump through to withdraw from a 401k to use for a purchase. That's even more difficult, in my opinion, than liquidating a stock account. So there's a lot of things to take a hard look at when you're evaluating what's a true cash or what's somebody's ability to finance.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I want to ask you this. I've seen a couple times when I represent a seller and we have multiple offers, the tax prorations. I've seen buyers say, well, we're, typical in this area is, 105%.
Mhm.
But I've seen some buyers say, okay, we're just asking for 90%. Have you seen any of that on your end as well, adjusting the tax prorations to make their offer a little more, lucrative?
I have not. The best I've seen is just 100%. So, in other words, whatever the tax bill is, that's what we'll take. I've not seen under, but that's interesting. That's a very good point. If you were really trying to compete hard and you knew you were, kind of the last two or three, something like taking less than 100% on a tax proration. Now, again, we have to be careful too, much like when you come in with appraisal waivers, the realtor and the attorney have to be astute enough to look. If you tell me, for example, you're going to do an appraisal waiver, but you're coming in on a conventional loan, I'm going to tell you it's not going to happen because a lender isn't going to approve the appraisal waiver if it comes in under. So we've immediately got a concern there. Lenders are also not going to accept that for taxes. At a minimum, they're probably going to want 100%. I've not seen a financing deal with less than 90. But again, if you've got a heavy cash deal, 60, 70% cash and a nominal mortgage amount or a true cash, that's one heck of a way to do it too. Another thing we've seen, and this is helpful, particularly in our area, I know you do a lot of work in downers in particular. When homes are improved significantly year over year, what you may want to do is look more closely at what the assessment is the prior year and say, okay, we'll just go based on the assessed amount because we know when the reassessments come out, either end of this month or early May, if there were significant improvements, they're going to be substantially higher for
Right.
tax purposes. So you might just say, I'll take the prior. The home was assessed at 450, but we know with the second story or maybe a great room addition and a second story, it might be up to 7. We'll just take the prior tax as well.
Yeah, that's very important. We've seen an increase of flipped homes over the
Yeah.
last several years, and that's the category that would definitely fit in. So I have a question. You mentioned before initials missing on paragraphs like as is. One of the things I come up with probably more often than not is the tax prorations. And when I'm representing the seller, it comes in blank. And again, the buyer's agent says, we'll just let the attorneys deal with that. And I always was a firm believer of putting something in there, an agreement on both buyers and sellers before it goes to the attorneys. What's your view on that?
There's
And
a
what could go
reason.
wrong leaving it empty?
Yeah, there's a reason why we have the seventh generation, right? The 7.0 of the multi-board contract. The history behind the multi-board briefly is realtors or real estate agents and attorneys work together to get a form that's generally acceptable. It's not perfect for some of us, and we understand that, but it's got the important things. The reason I point that out is, so for example, when there's a blank space for the seller information, if you want to put my office in particular, it's just my personal bugaboo and everybody's got theirs, put down owner of record for seller, because that tells me immediately you're not at the top of your game. There's no reason to put owner of record, right? Put the seller's name in there. Fill in the blanks for tax prorations. Right. Fill in whether or not you're going to do a second earnest money deposit within X number of days of acceptance. The more that you leave blank, the 7.0, and you in the teaser for the interview today, you talked about, how do you get out of a contract? The sad reality is there's a lot of ways that you can legally get out of that contract. One of the easiest ways for somebody to wiggle on it or walk away from it is don't fill in a lot of those blanks and then have it go to the attorneys, because you hit it right on the head. Rule of thumb in everywhere except Cook is 105% on tax prorations. Well, if I'm representing the buyer and I go to the seller and say, hey, I want 105% because we're in DuPage County, seller says, no way, it was left blank, so it's only going to be 100%. There's a good chance we may kill it, right? So fill that stuff in so we know the important components. Also, right, at 5:30 on Friday afternoon, if we're under the gun to terminate a contract or to get some agreement on repairs, sorry, the light's hitting my face a little weird trying to move. We want to be able to reach out to the attorney, right? I don't want to be searching for Joe Johnson, the attorney in Chicago, and there's probably 10,000 of them, so I can serve a termination notice. Please give us as much information as you can in the pre-printed components, because those are super easy for us, there we go, to be able to reach out and get information quickly.
Yeah, fantastic. Another one that I always feel is important is, and let me see if I could share this. Give me a second here. Here we go. Line 62, where it says interest rate shall not exceed, a certain percent. I see a lot of when I represent a seller come in from buyers, and that's either left blank or to be determined. I always, when I'm representing a buyer, I want to put a value in there to protect my buyers, because let's just say interest rates are at 6.5. I might put, an eighth higher than that or a quarter higher, meaning, this is my interpretation, I'd love to hear yours, is that if the interest rate exceeds that, that gives and maybe my buyer can no longer afford that home, it gives them the option to back out if they have to without risking their earnest money.
Absolutely.
What's your thought on that? And what's the risk of leaving it blank?
Well, the risk is, let's say you're coming into a week where there's an open market meeting and the Fed may or may not be moving. If you don't put anything in there and your buyer is pre-qualified, for argument's sake, let's say we're at 6.75 right now, and the Fed moves, or the market gets the sense the Fed is going to move, and suddenly rates bump up to 7.25, the math on mortgages, that's going to significantly eat into what a buyer may be able to afford. So by leaving it blank, you're exposed, because you're exposed in the sense that if you put it in, and I think your eighth is very conservative, although I laud you, I tend to go with a half point just to be safe if it's blank. That way, when a lender comes back and says, hey, Kev, we can do the mortgage, but it's no longer 6.75, it's 7. Well, if we put 7.25 in there, or whatever the numbers shake out, I think it is important. And we've had several deals in this up and down cycle since the first of the year where rates have fluctuated enough. It's also important. It's probably more important, Slav, if it's interest or income property, because those rates are already higher than
Sure.
homestead property, and they tend to fluctuate even more. So if you've got an investor coming in to either do a flip or a hold and lease, whatever the case is, those numbers are very, very sensitive, and you definitely want to have something in there because the investors aren't going to expose themselves. They're going to want to keep it pretty tight. So I think it is very important. I also, in that same line, I think this is another area where there's some duplicity at times. Mortgage comes in as conventional. Let's just say it's a vanilla 80-20. 2 weeks into it, without telling anybody, the buyer decides, well, I'm going to go FHA. Folks, we got a problem, right? I know it happens routinely. And I also tend to be of the mind that we all want deals to close, but as you know, there are significant constraints that come with an FHA VA loan, not the least of which is the FHA VA appraisal. That builds time into, and frankly, it's most likely going to build in some required repairs. If you need to flip from a conventional to an FHA, I'm of the opinion that you need to notify the seller's attorney as soon as possible. If you're going to do it within the attorney review period, that's probably the best, in my opinion. But if you're going to flip it from conventional to FHA 2 weeks before closing, there's no way it's probably going to close in those 2 weeks. And frankly, you've breached the contract because you've made a material change.
Right.
So
Exactly. You're changing the contract. Even if you're just staying, you're not changing conventional loan to FHA, but if you're changing lenders, you need to let the other party know. And we need a new pre-approval as well. You just can't make that change without notifying anybody.
And just on the point of investors too, because we see this a lot, and I know you've had to deal with it. You have an investor coming in, oh, it's a cash deal, it's a cash deal. I tend to tell people, even if you know it's going to be a cash deal, crazy things happen. Check the box for financing that says cash with mortgage allowed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, if your client buyer comes in and we're a week before closing and suddenly says, you know what, instead of a little rehab, we're going to do a major rehab. So we want to sit on more cash. So now we're going to go out for a loan. If you haven't checked the cash mortgage allowed, theoretically, we're going to be in a breach situation and nobody's going to be happy. So protect yourself on the buy side and just check the box that says cash mortgage allowed. And if you're thinking you're going to move that way, let the seller's attorney know, hey, we're cash, but we may be moving to this financing component. The sooner we know, right? Nobody likes surprises in real estate closings. The sooner we know, the sooner we can advise our clients and get ready, right? If you tell me 10 days after the contract's accepted and we've closed attorney review, you're going to move from cash to finance, it's probably not going to delay closing significantly, if at all. If you tell me 2 days before closing, now we got a problem.
Right. And that's really important in multiple offer situation bidding wars, because now all of a sudden, if you're attaching the possibility of going to mortgage, now we also have to compare, that mortgage company to everybody else, because with the chance of it going into a financing situation rather than cash, that changes everything.
Yeah, there's some dollar amount, and for every seller, it's going to be different. In my mind, not having financing versus cash could be worth anywhere from a $10,000 to $20,000 difference because of the certitude that a cash deal is most likely going to close. And certainly not in a discriminatory way, but I think it's important in multiple offer situations. You need to look at who the lenders are too.
Mm-hmm.
If they're strong nationwide lenders that have a track record of performing and be able to close on time, I'm much more comfortable than a lender that I've never heard of, or an out-of-state lender, or a credit union from North Dakota. I love credit unions, but if we've never worked with them before, there's always a question about, well, how familiar are they with how we do things in Illinois? Because like many other things in Illinois, our real estate transactions are a little bit different than a lot of the other states. So ability for lender to perform, I think, is yet another one of those things that you have to factor into multiple offers.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, if you have a minute, we got a couple questions and comments here I want to go through.
Oh, sure.
Um, so the first one is, well, it's from the Rotary Club of Downers Grove. So I'm assuming somebody there is in the real estate industry as a lender or a realtor. Says, oh, as a lender, if the appraisal comes in low, we can adjust the loan to value to reflect the new LTV. For adjustments, it still may be approved. So
It still may be, but in my experience, if you're coming in with the 80-20 and which means 20% down, 80% loan, and that's all you have, you're probably not, it's going to be irrelevant. If you're coming in with 50% down and the appraisal comes in a little low, in those circumstances, we can almost always accommodate the appraisal differences. But when you're right at the high end
mhm.
or in an FHA, when you're coming in with a bare minimum down, an appraisal variance is almost always going to require a renegotiation or a change in the purchase price, because you just can't do it in that circumstance.
All right, fantastic. And thank you for that person for that comment. Here's another one. It says, right on, Kevin. Pet peeve when contracts are not specific, completely filled, and the OOR or owner of record. Um, this one here says, questions. Slav and Kevin, are the contract cancellations happening right after attorney inspection?
So what we're seeing now, now being the present market, 18 months ago, we would see, this would be a perfect example. I come into the office on Monday. We had 4 contracts come in over the weekend. And by 3 o'clock this afternoon, 2 of them are going to cancel before anything even occurs, because buyers were hedging their bets. They were putting in, it's unethical. I understand all of that. I'm just telling you my experience.
Right.
And then people started terminating. What we're seeing now is either within a couple of days of attorney review, for many of the reasons that I think we're talking about, because frankly, it's hard to find out what the cancellation reason is. One of the things about doing this for more than a couple of minutes and being collegial with the other attorneys, even though you don't have to tell me, and I practice the same way. If we're going to terminate not for price, I often will talk to the other attorney and say, look, here's what's going on. The long answer, or the short answer to your question, is if it doesn't terminate right away, like life circumstance changed over the weekend, and unfortunately that occurs. Somebody became ill, somebody found out they're losing a job or they're moving. What tends to drive it now is, yeah, we know we signed an as is, but we did the inspection and we were prepared to plunk down 50 grand in repairs, and our inspector said it's going to be more like 100 or 150, and there's just no way we're going to be able to do it. So
Right.
what I'm seeing now tends to be more after the inspection, because people are going in eyes wide open. They know they're going to need to spend something, but that something becomes, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times as much as they thought. And that's when we're seeing terminations.
Sure. First time home buyers, they may have never had an experience with owning a home. They decide to go in as is, get their offer accepted. And then, as like you said, the inspector goes through, starts giving them a list of everything that's wrong and how much it's going to cost. And the next thing you know, they're changing their mind. Once the attorney review is closed, inspection period is closed, are you seeing a lot of cancellations after that point? I would imagine at that point, because there's a risk of losing your earnest money, that is mostly because of something happening to somebody's job or,
Yeah.
Personal family situations, what causes them to cancel, right?
We've had a couple of late where buyers just got cold feet because of market conditions and said, I am prepared to lose earnest money. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And this is why I think it's important for realtors and everybody involved on the transaction, but particularly on the sell side. There's multiple hurdles you have to get through. There's the 5-day attorney review. We got through that. Now they can't cancel. Yeah, but then you've got the inspection. Okay, fine. We got over that hurdle. Now they can't cancel. Yeah, but we've got a financing contingency. Well, when are we going to know about that? Well, sadly, most of the time, if you're going to cancel because of financing, it tends to be very close to closing because something happened. This frustrates me. One of my pet peeves is, I talked about owner of record. The other is lenders that are issuing pre-approvals and have no idea what they're doing. You should not, in my opinion, if somebody is a 1099 employee, 1099 meaning they're either self-employed or they work on a commission basis, so they don't have a real high salary, I think it's questionable if you're issuing pre-approvals because you have no idea what their legitimate in the
Right.
sense of, if you're a W-2 employee, right? If I work at, I've drawn a blank. In the old days, if I worked at Sears, you could pull my W-2 and you know what I'd make on an annual basis. It's easy. Now with 1099, it's a little bit questionable. And that irritates me to no end because, Slav, when you come to me, if I'm a lender, I know your income fluctuates year over year. So I'm going to be hesitant to issue a pre-approval at the higher end of your purchase power because maybe your taxes aren't going to bear that out. And when I get a termination and a lender says, well, we didn't realize they were 1099. What do you mean you didn't realize? Some of the first information that a lender will ask for is prior year's tax returns, employment who do you work for? If you say I work for myself, that should be a huge red flag that we might have, debt to income and other issues. So to answer your question directly, once attorney review is closed, you're exposed a little for the repairs, and then you sort of bump along for the next few weeks, hoping that financing is going to be able to come together. Generally, it works out, but occasionally you'll see where people have to add a parent or try and add a brother or a sister, and that's usually my experience. It tends to be a precursor to termination. When a lender says 2 weeks before closing, we can't credit score Slav high enough, so we're going to add his sister. Now we're going through underwriting again. At a minimum, we're probably going to be 3 weeks down the road, if not a straight up termination. So if it's financing, sadly, it often happens right before closing.
Sure. I agree. And whether I'm representing the seller or buyer, I'm in contact with the lenders all the time. And if I'm not hearing from them, I'm bugging them because I want to know exactly what's going on. And if there's an issue, we need to take care of it right away and not wait till the last minute. And
that's important. And that's why you're excellent at what you do, because it is important to do that. We feel the same way when we're on the sell side and we don't see anything of substance. I'm not talking about the weekly sort of, hey, we move from A to B and, on the chart. I'm looking for substantive updates. If the lenders go silent, we start to tell our seller clients we got an issue. Right. Especially if taking affirmative steps like calling or emailing the lender saying, hey, closing's 2 weeks out, where are we at? And we don't hear anything. That's never a good sign.
Yeah. So Kevin, thank you so much for your time. So much great information, and I'll have the recording up. Before we go, if there's one biggest thing, a piece of advice you could give to both buyers and sellers regarding the contract to avoid any issues down the road, what would that one thing be?
Whatever it is, when you're sitting at your kitchen table as a seller and Slav's sitting with there because he's representing you and he's talking to the buyer's agent and you're agreeing, yeah, we have $15,000 worth of patio furniture and pool stuff. Yeah, fine, we'll include that. Better put those kind of things in the contract. Or, oh yeah, you guys have a great wet bar and you've got a cool refrigerator and you've got a unique set of bar stools. If that's not included in the contract, my experience tends to be it doesn't get included down the road. And right. Often when you're looking at very unique things, we recently had a home, fortunately the buyer ultimately was able to purchase it, had a substantial amount of improvement in a home entertainment center in the basement, but all the stuff that made it great, the chairs for the theater room, the unique bar stools, the jukebox in the basement, the this, the that. If that's the linchpin for the deal, just like post-possession, just like as is, paper it up before it comes to the attorneys.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And also, if you're a seller, don't assume the buyer wants some of your stuff if it's not in the contract, because then next thing you know, you're at the closing table and the buyers are asking for a credit to have it disposed of, or you're scrambling at the last minute to get rid of the stuff. So great information.
Yeah, we see horror stories on both sides with that. Yeah. If you've got, a chef's kitchen with Miele appliances, don't think as a seller you're going to be able to remove those and say, oh, well, that wasn't included, right? I mean, that's critical, and it's those sorts of things. If you've got something that you know is obvious that you're taking with you, better make sure it gets excluded from the personal property that's included as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, Kevin, how can people best get a hold of you?
Best way to get us is call the office, 630-568-6656. I'm in Downers Grove, just up the street from you, 630-568-6656. Or feel free to find us on the web at Camden Law Office, lawofficesingular.com.
All right, Kevin, thanks again. Have a great day, and I look forward to working with you on future deals.
My pleasure. Enjoy the weather. Have a great day.
All right.